If a diamond ring is meant to symbolize eternal love, then why does it shine brightest on the finger of the woman who replaced you? Just as you're boarding a jet with a man whose fortune could buy the world, yet you feel no regret at all. What if losing everything was the only way to truly win? The ballroom at the Marquise Hotel shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each one casting shards of rainbow light onto the polished marble floor. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated between the gold-draped tables, balancing trays laden with champagne and caviar. In every corner, Manhattan's elite whispered secrets and scandals behind manicured hands. The city's biggest charity gala had always been a showcase for power and wealth, but tonight, the real show wasn't on the stage. It was in the center of the room, where Julian Vaughn stood with his new fiancée, smiling wide enough to split his face. Julian's arm was around Brielle Chase, a vision in a red dress, her left hand raised high for all to see. The ring, a monstrous, glittering diamond that looked heavy enough to bruise, caught every camera flash in the room. Guests pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle, hungry for gossip. Julian's laughter was just a little too loud, his grin a little too sharp, as if he wanted the whole world to witness this moment. For Julian, tonight wasn't just about the charity or the money. It was about sending a message. He had moved on, traded up, and the proof was on Brielle's finger. Reporters circled like sharks, shoving microphones forward. "Julian, how does it feel to be engaged again so soon?" someone called out. Brielle preened, leaning in as Julian turned to the cameras. "I believe in second chances," he said, his voice slick and confident. "And I believe in celebrating happiness. Isn't that what life is about?" He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room, everyone in the city, knew about his ex-wife, knew that just a year ago, Julian had stood at this same gala with another woman at his side. The air was thick with judgment and curiosity. What most didn't know was that on the other side of town, a very different scene was playing out. At Teterboro Private Airport, soft yellow lights glowed along the runway, painting the sleek curve of a midnight blue jet. Inside the terminal, a woman sat quietly by a window, staring out at the rain. Her name was Evelyn Blake, and tonight she was supposed to be at the gala too. For years, she had played her part as Mrs. Julian Vaughn, smiling at galas, keeping up appearances, always silent when her husband's ambition cut a little too deep. But tonight, she wore no diamonds, no designer gown. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her posture calm and unyielding. A phone buzzed on the table beside her. Evelyn glanced at it, recognizing her best friend's number. A string of texts had come in. He's parading her around like he's won the lottery. "The ring is obscene. They're saying it's $3 million. Are you okay? Please tell me you didn't see this." Evelyn typed a reply, her fingers steady. "I'm more than okay. Don't worry about me. Tell me when they start the silent auction. I want to know how much he overspends on the painting this year." There was a time when news like this would have broken her. She remembered last year's gala too well, how Julian had made a scene, how Brielle had hovered near him, not caring who saw. Evelyn had felt the world's eyes on her, waiting for a reaction. But tonight was different. Tonight there was no audience, no spotlight. There was only Evelyn, her suitcase, and the sound of engines starting outside. She stood, smoothing her dress, and glanced at her reflection in the glass. There were faint shadows under her eyes, but her gaze was clear. She walked toward the private lounge where a tall man in a dark suit waited by the door. He was older, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back and a jaw set like stone. This was Alexander Pierce, a name whispered in Forbes articles and Wall Street boardrooms, a man whose fortune made Julian's look like pocket change. "Are you ready, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice warm and steady. She nodded. "I am. Thank you for coming all the way out here." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, offering his arm. "We can be wheels up in 10 minutes, Paris by morning if you want." She smiled, small and genuine. "Anywhere but here." Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Evelyn and Alexander walked together toward the waiting jet, every step echoing with the weight of endings and the promise of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed again. One last message from her friend. "He's making a speech. He thanked you. Said you helped make him the man he is." Evelyn stared at the screen, then typed back with a wry smile. "He's not wrong. I did. But he has no idea what I made of myself." Behind her, the city's brightest ballroom was caught up in Julian's charade. Cameras flashed, laughter rang out, Betrayal sparkled. But no one noticed the quiet departure at the airport, the elegant woman stepping onto a jet without looking back. No one saw the billionaire at her side, the way he looked at her with respect, not possession. And as the jet's door closed, as Evelyn buckled in and Alexander sat across from her with a glass of champagne, there was only one thing she felt. No regret. Only relief, only freedom, and the sense that her real story, the one without Julian, without betrayal, was just about to begin. Tonight, Julian Vaughn could have his headlines, his diamonds, his hollow victory. Evelyn Blake was airborne, far above it all, with a future brighter than any ring. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. If you asked anyone in Manhattan about Evelyn Blake a year ago, you'd get a polite smile, maybe a shrug, and the same story. She was Julian Vaughn's wife. The girl from nowhere. Soft-spoken, always dressed just a shade too simply for the circles she moved in. Her life, from the outside, seemed like a classic fairy tale. But nobody ever asked how the fairy tale began, or what it cost to keep the glass slipper on. Evelyn was born Evelyn Harper in a tiny town outside Des Moines, Iowa. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a part-time school secretary. They lived in a faded yellow house at the edge of town, a place where dreams felt small and the horizon always looked so far away. Evelyn's mother taught her to read before kindergarten and filled her world with stories of places she'd never seen. Her father, rough around the edges but gentle in his own way, built her a wooden swing on the big sycamore tree. It was on that swing Evelyn made a silent vow. She would not spend her whole life wishing for more. She'd find a way to leave, to see what was out there, even if it meant doing it all alone. By 16, Evelyn was valedictorian and working weekends at the local diner, squirreling away every tip. College was her ticket out. She earned a full scholarship to NYU, studying finance. The city overwhelmed her, but she forced herself to keep up. While classmates bought designer clothes and Ubered everywhere, Evelyn thrifted her blazers and walked in the rain, never complaining, never missing class. Her favorite spot was the university library, where she could dream without feeling small. It was during her senior year that she met Julian Vaughn, tall, magnetic, the son of a real estate magnate. He swaggered into her life like a storm, all confidence and expensive cologne. Julian noticed Evelyn at a campus mixer, drawn by her quick wit and the way she listened more than she spoke. Their first date was a blur of rooftop views, laughter, and promises whispered under city lights. To Evelyn, Julian was dazzling, a man who made the world spin faster, who saw her not as a girl from nowhere, but as someone worth showing off. For a while she believed him. The whirlwind romance swept her into a new life. After graduation, they married in a marble-floored ceremony, the guest list packed with names Evelyn recognized from magazine covers. Julian liked to show her off. "My wife is so smart. She's from Iowa. She's real." At every event, she was the breath of fresh air among heiresses and models. But as months passed, Evelyn felt herself shrinking inside the golden cage. Julian liked his women elegant but silent, sharp but never threatening. Whenever she spoke her mind about business, about art, about his company, he'd smile, squeeze her hand a little too tight, and change the subject. In private, things were different. Julian had a temper, a need to control, a way of making Evelyn doubt herself. He'd mock her for crying at old movies, belittle her for acting like a small-town girl. When she suggested saving money or helping her family, her opinions became invisible, her needs always second to his. She learned to apologize even when she hadn't done anything wrong, learned to smooth over his tantrums and accept that her value was tied to how well she fit the role he'd written for her. The years blurred together. Evelyn threw herself into charity work, first as a volunteer, later as the silent backbone behind Julian's philanthropic image. She managed events, balanced books, and built relationships with donors, all while letting Julian take the credit. She thought if she just tried hard enough, she could make him happy, make him see her for who she really was. It never worked. Her breaking point came the night of their 5th anniversary. The gala was in full swing. Julian was laughing too loudly, glass of scotch in hand, whispering with a woman Evelyn didn't recognize. When Evelyn confronted him later, he sneered, "Don't embarrass yourself. You know how these things work." That night, she cried for the first time in years. She realized nothing would ever change. But what no one knew, what even Julian failed to notice, was that Evelyn never stopped learning. While he mingled with the rich and famous, she built a quiet empire of her own. She invested her small inheritance in startups run by women, learned the language of stocks and crypto, and made shrewd moves under an alias. She used the skills she honed in Julian's shadow, turning his lessons in manipulation into her armor. By the time their marriage truly unraveled, Evelyn was already standing on her own financial ground, even if the world saw her as fragile. So when the divorce came, public, ugly, splashed across tabloids, Evelyn played her part. She let the lawyers do the talking. Let Julian bask in the attention of his new fiancée. Let the world whisper that she'd be lost without him. What they didn't see was Evelyn quietly severing ties, buying herself an apartment in Paris, reconnecting with friends and mentors Julian never knew she had. She never took the bait, never stooped to Julian's level, never gave a headline the satisfaction of her pain. And now, here she was, not the abandoned ex-wife, not the heartbroken girl from Iowa, but a woman with her own story, a story no longer defined by Julian Vaughn. As the jet taxied toward the runway, Alexander Pierce sat across from her, watching with a mix of curiosity and admiration. He knew bits of her past, but he was most interested in her future. "You know," he said quietly, "there's nothing more dangerous than a woman who has nothing left to lose." Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes clear, or a woman who finally realizes she never needed anyone's permission to be happy. Outside, the city shrank beneath them, the lights blurring into gold and gray. Inside the jet, Evelyn closed her eyes, let out a breath, and felt, for the first time in years, absolutely free. The city that never sleeps sparkled with a million pinpricks of light, each one a story unfolding behind penthouse windows and velvet ropes. Tonight, two stories ran in parallel, one awash in golden excess, the other soaring above it all, leaving behind the noise of broken dreams. Back at the Marquis Hotel, Julian Vaughn basked in the afterglow of attention, his hand never leaving Brielle's waist. Around him, the world was a blur of expensive perfume, laughter like wind chimes, and the constant, subtle flash of camera phones. This was Julian's element, a stage he'd built brick, dollar by dollar, fueled by a hunger to prove himself. As servers passed with silver trays of truffled shrimp and miniature lobster rolls, Julian guided Brielle to the gala's centerpiece. A massive ice sculpture in the shape of the charity's logo. He tapped his glass for attention. "Friends," Julian's voice echoed through the ballroom, practiced and perfectly pitched. "Thank you for being here tonight. This city has given me everything. I want to share that blessing, not just with the cause we all support, but with the woman who's made me believe in happiness again." His eyes lingered on Brielle, and she flashed the ring for the crowd, drawing gasps and applause. In the back, a small group of women exchanged looks. Some were envious, others skeptical. A few recognized the pattern. How quick Julian had moved on, how much louder he laughed when Evelyn was gone. But the moment swept on. The orchestra struck up a waltz, couples flooded the floor, and Julian, arm in arm with Brielle, danced beneath the spotlights as if the world had never turned on its axis. Above them, high above the towers of steel and glass, Evelyn's world was changing by the second. Inside Alexander Pierce's private jet, everything was hushed and serene. The cabin glowed with soft amber light, accented by the deep blue of the velvet seats and the gentle hum of engines. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the city shrink, the skyline dissolving into mist as they banked toward the Atlantic. "Would you like some wine?" Alexander asked, pouring 2 glasses of Sancerre. He offered one to Evelyn, who accepted with a grateful nod. "To new beginnings," Alexander toasted. Evelyn raised her glass, the cool crystal trembling ever so slightly in her grip. "To never looking back." They sipped in silence for a moment, letting the reality settle around them. Here was a woman once written off as collateral damage, now a guest in a world most only glimpsed in magazines. Alexander wasn't just a billionaire in the tabloid sense. He was a power broker, a man who could shift markets with a phone call. But in this quiet moment, he was simply a friend, someone who saw the pain behind Evelyn's practiced smile. "Do you miss it?" he asked gently. "The events, the parties, the way everyone knew your name?" Evelyn let out a soft laugh. You mean, do I miss pretending to be happy for the sake of strangers? Not a bit. Alexander smiled, sensing the weight behind her words. I hope you know, you're not just running away. You're running towards something better. Evelyn watched the clouds swirl outside, her mind drifting to the life she'd left behind. She thought of the years spent tiptoeing around Julian's moods, the hours wasted on apologies, the effort she poured into making their home a sanctuary, only to have it shattered by ambition and ego. She looked at Alexander, determination sharpening her features. I'm not running, not anymore. For the first time, I'm choosing my own destination. The jet leveled out, cutting smoothly through the night. Evelyn's phone buzzed with notifications, tabloid headlines about the gala, texts from acquaintances who pretended to care. She put it aside, refusing to let gossip define her. The world could say what it wanted. She was done playing the role of the scorned ex-wife. Back in Manhattan, the party swelled to its climax. Julian and Betrayal posed for a round of photographs, every angle calculated for maximum impact. He felt invincible, untouchable, the king of his own glittering court. But for all the eyes on him, for all the hands shaking his, a flicker of insecurity passed across Julian's face when the music paused and someone mentioned Evelyn's absence. Where is she tonight? An investor's wife whispered, just loud enough for Julian to hear. I always liked her, you know, she had such grace. Julian bristled, squeezing Betrayal's hand a bit too tightly. Evelyn's moved on, he replied, his tone clipped. We both have. She's probably on a yoga retreat or something. It's for the best. The lie tasted bitter. For all his bravado, Julian couldn't erase the memory of Evelyn's quiet strength, the way she'd carried herself at these events, never trying to outshine anyone, yet always unforgettable. No matter how loud the room got, Julian sometimes caught himself searching for her laughter, her calming presence, the one thing he'd never been able to buy or control. But Evelyn was gone. And tonight, Julian believed he'd finally won. Miles above, Evelyn reclined in her seat, exhaustion washing over her as the city disappeared behind her. She'd spent years trapped in a life built on pretense. Now, with every mile the jet covered, she felt lighter. The pain of betrayal, the weight of expectation, even the sting of public humiliation, all of it was fading with the lights of Manhattan. She looked at Alexander, a silent question in her eyes. Do you ever regret leaving it all behind? Alexander's answer was simple. Only the time I wasted before I did. Evelyn smiled. Then maybe we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. The jet soared higher, carving a path into the unknown. In the ballroom below, applause thundered and champagne flowed. But the real story, the one that would be whispered in boardrooms and beauty salons for years, wasn't about the size of Betrayal's diamond or the man who bought it. It was about the woman who dared to leave it all behind, and the new world she was about to claim. Every fairy tale needs a villain, but in Manhattan, the lines are rarely so clear. Julian Vaughn's new life was a performance staged for the world. All sparkle, no shadow. If you asked him, he wasn't the villain. He was the hero who survived a cold, unsupportive wife and rebuilt his happiness. But those who watched closely, who heard the rumors behind the curtain, knew better. Julian was not just a man who moved on. He was a man who needed to win at any cost, no matter who he trampled along the way. Tonight, at the Marquise Hotel, Julian basked in the spotlight. Every word he spoke was chosen for effect. Every smile was sharpened with the memory of battles lost and won. At his side, Betrayal Chase radiated the confidence of someone who believed she had finally arrived. She was the face of Julian's upgrade, younger, flashier, unburdened by a past that asked questions or expected too much. In private, their relationship was transactional, built on shared ambition and mutual advantage. Do you like it? Betrayal whispered, flashing her ring at a group of influencers clustered near the dance floor. He picked it out himself. 3 carats, cushion cut. Julian says it's just a symbol, but I say it's a promise. The women fawned over the ring, their faces masks of envy and admiration. But their smiles were brittle. Even in their world, it was impossible not to notice how fast everything had moved. Betrayal, just months ago a PR manager with barely a blue check to her name, was now the most talked about woman in the city. She drank it in, blissfully unaware of the target on her back. Meanwhile, Julian scanned the room with a predator's awareness. He saw not friends but assets, potential partners, rivals, threats. Every deal was a chess match, every favor a debt to be called in later. That's how he'd risen so fast, how he'd built an empire from the ruins of his father's mistakes. He liked to think he could control any narrative. With Betrayal on his arm and the city at his feet, Julian felt unstoppable. But even the king of the gala couldn't silence the whispers. "He's trying too hard," one guest murmured, eyeing Julian's forced cheer. "Did you hear how he left Evelyn? They say he timed the divorce so she'd get less in the settlement." A financier nodded. "Rumor is, he's been seeing Betrayal since before the papers were even filed. Poor Evelyn never stood a chance." Across the room, Betrayal caught fragments of these conversations, but she dismissed them. In her mind, she was the main character, and the only story that mattered was the one with her name in lights. She squeezed Julian's hand, leaning close so the cameras would catch every perfect angle. "Smile for the press, darling," she purred. "Let's give them a show." Julian obliged, his eyes cold behind the glare. To him, Betrayal was another proof of his victory. He'd rewritten the story of his failed marriage so thoroughly that even he almost believed it. "Evelyn was holding me back," he told himself. "Betrayal believes in me." But every now and then, a flash of insecurity crossed his face, a flicker of doubt that nothing, no amount of applause or attention could quite erase. Their lives were built on glass, and both knew it. That's why they pushed harder, partied louder, grasped for more. Underneath it all, fear hummed, a fear that the empire they'd built together was as fragile as the lies they told themselves each night. Back at the bar, Betrayal's best friend Simone leaned in close. "You're trending everywhere," she whispered, showing Betrayal her phone. #Betrayalian Julian is blowing up, but there's also a hashtag for Evelyn. Team Evelyn, you should see the comments. Betrayal's jaw clenched, the smile never leaving her lips. "People are jealous, let them talk, I won." Simone hesitated, sensing the undercurrent. "Are you sure you did?" For a heartbeat, Betrayal's mask slipped and fear crept into her eyes. But she shook it off. "Of course, why else would Julian pick me?" The answer was obvious to anyone paying attention. Julian picked whoever fit the moment, whoever helped him win. That was the lesson Betrayal hadn't learned yet. She thought the ring, the parties, the headlines meant she was safe. She didn't understand she was as replaceable as anyone else in Julian's world. As the gala surged around them, Julian checked his watch, impatience flickering across his face. He hated waiting. He hated feeling like he was missing something. For all the glamour and success, part of him still seethed with resentment. At Evelyn, at his father, at anyone who'd ever doubted him. Tonight was supposed to erase all of that. But no matter how many cameras flashed, the emptiness remained. Far above, on a jet bound for freedom, Evelyn didn't know or care about the headlines. She wasn't watching the hashtags or counting the eyes on her. She was leaving behind the villains who'd tried to write her out of her own story. But in Manhattan, the show had to go on. Julian and Betrayal danced, smiled, posed for the world, convinced their story was a fairy tale. But even the best fairy tales have a reckoning. And the higher the glass tower, the further it is to fall. In the glittering world of New York's elite, perception was everything. And nowhere was that more true than at the Vaughn Family Foundation Gala, the city's annual spectacle of power and privilege. For years, Evelyn Blake had been the face of the event. She had personally curated the guest list, chosen the cause, and greeted each donor with a warmth that made them feel not just important, but remembered. Her attention to detail and genuine kindness were the glue that held the city's philanthropic circles together. This year, though, was different. Julian and Betrayal had seized control of every aspect of the event. Betrayal, eager to prove her worth, appointed herself head of public relations, dismissing Evelyn's trusted team and hiring a new staff loyal only to her and Julian. The invitations, once signed by Julian and Evelyn Vaughn, now bore only Julian's name and Betrayal's holographic signature, the ink still wet with arrogance. Evelyn knew this would happen, of course. She'd seen it coming from the moment Betrayal moved in, her eyes alight with the thrill of conquest. But she didn't realize just how thorough they would be in their campaign to erase her. 2 weeks before the gala, a glossy profile in a leading magazine featured Julian and Betrayal under the headline, "A New Era of Glamour. Manhattan's Power Couple Reinvent the City's Most Beloved Charity." There was no mention of Evelyn's years of service, no reference to the nights she'd spent balancing the books or smoothing over ruffled egos. It was as if she'd never existed at all. The night of the gala arrived. Cameras lined the marble entrance of the Conrad Hotel, catching every shimmer of Brielle's silver gown as she descended from Julian's chauffeured Bentley. Photographers shouted their names, eager for a shot of the couple whose faces now sold more than just real estate. They sold a story. Behind them, the city's most influential lined up to be seen, eager to bask in the reflected glow of new royalty. Inside, the ballroom was transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal centerpieces, walls washed in violet light, tables set with gold-rimmed plates, and handwritten place cards, each one checked twice by Brielle herself. In the middle of the room, a massive display celebrated the future of the Vaughn Foundation, with digital screens looping photos of Julian and Brielle visiting orphanages, planting trees, and shaking hands with politicians. The message was clear: the future belonged to them. For a moment, Julian felt invincible. He swept through the crowd, arm tight around Brielle's waist, collecting compliments, laughing at every joke. But even as he played the gracious host, he never stopped scanning the room for a certain face, a face he insisted he'd forgotten. Halfway through the evening, the program began. Brielle took the stage, her voice bright and practiced. Tonight, we're here to celebrate not just a charity, but a new chapter. When Julian and I decided to take the foundation in a bold new direction, we knew we had to dream big. And look what we've built together. Her words sparkled, but her eyes were hard, scanning the room to ensure every camera was pointed at her. After her speech, Julian stepped up to the microphone. He thanked the donors, praised Brielle, and spoke of moving forward. Then came the moment that would be replayed on social media for weeks. "We honor those who helped us get here, even if they're not with us tonight," Julian said, pausing just long enough for the room to buzz with speculation. "Change is never easy, but it's always necessary. So let's toast to the future, and to those who made the past possible." It was a masterstroke of erasure, a nod to Evelyn that sounded like praise but felt like a shove out the door. The applause that followed was polite but cool. Among the guests, some exchanged uncomfortable glances, others whispered behind raised hands. The message was clear. Evelyn was gone, and she wasn't coming back. Backstage, Brielle watched the reactions on a hidden monitor, her mouth set in a triumphant line. "She'll see this online," she muttered to her assistant. "She'll finally get it. This is our world now." The final act of the night came in the form of a video tribute. A montage played on the giant screens, set to swelling music. Brielle cutting ribbons, Julian shaking hands, happy children holding gifts. In the entire 7-minute reel, there was not a single image of Evelyn. Her years of work had been wiped clean, as if they'd never happened. The city watched as a woman's legacy vanished in a flicker of pixels. Far from the glitz and glare, in a quiet apartment on the other side of town, Evelyn saw the video on her phone. She didn't cry. Not this time. She watched as her former life played out without her, her role rewritten by those who saw her only as an inconvenience. The betrayal burned, but beneath it was something colder, harder. She realized that this was the freedom she'd been too afraid to claim. For years, she'd worried about her reputation, about being liked, about not making waves. Now, with nothing left to lose, she felt her fear dissolve into resolve. If they wanted her erased, they would soon find out how dangerous a woman with no place left at the table could be. The world watched Evelyn fall. But nobody realized the story was only halfway done. And for Julian and Brielle, the real reckoning was just beginning. The days after the gala unfolded in slow motion, each hour dragging behind it a leaden weight. Evelyn found herself drifting through her apartment as if she were a ghost in someone else's home. Her movements automatic and silent. She barely noticed the morning sun bleeding through the curtains, the hum of city traffic outside, or the stack of unopened mail by the door. Every detail of the world seemed muted, dulled by a heartbreak so profound she wondered if it would ever lift. She hadn't realized how deeply Julian and Brielle's betrayal would cut. She'd told herself she was prepared. She'd told herself it didn't matter anymore, that she had moved on. But watching the city's most important night play out without her, a life she had built erased in a single evening, stung more than she expected. Every message on her phone, every post online felt like a fresh reminder. She had been written out of her own story. Evelyn spent hours on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, replaying memories she wished she could forget. She remembered the first time Julian had truly looked at her, back when he still believed in love. There had been warmth in his eyes, a promise she'd clung to in her darkest moments. Now, those memories felt like cruel jokes, the kind you tell yourself in the dark to keep from shattering. Sometimes, her mind would drift to Betrayal. She tried to summon anger, to hate the woman who had taken her place, but all she felt was a hollow ache. Betrayal was just another player in Julian's endless game, someone who, like her, wanted desperately to belong, to be chosen, to be seen. In another life, Evelyn thought, maybe they could have been friends, but not in this one. Not with so much blood on the marble. The loneliness was the hardest part. For years, her life had been filled with noise and people, fundraisers, committee meetings, phone calls at all hours. Now, the silence pressed in on her like a living thing. Even her closest friends, unsure of what to say, kept their distance. Some sent flowers, others sent cautious texts. Most simply faded away, unwilling to risk Julian's wrath or Betrayal's scorn by staying loyal to the woman everyone now called the ex. Evelyn's family back in Iowa didn't understand the world she'd married into. Her mother left voicemails, gentle and worried, urging her to come home for a while, just to rest. But going home felt impossible, like admitting defeat. She didn't want to be pitied. She didn't want her parents to see what she had become, a woman cast out of her own life. One night, after hours of staring at the ceiling, Evelyn stumbled to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, hands shaking. Her reflection in the window startled her. A pale ghost, hair mussed, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, letting the grief and anger pour out until her chest ached and her throat burned. She thought of all the things she had given up for Julian. She had quit jobs, distanced herself from friends, molded herself into the perfect wife. She'd become fluent in the language of compromise, always putting his needs ahead of her own. Now, left with nothing, she realized just how much of herself she'd lost along the way. The next day, she tried to distract herself. She cleaned the apartment, made coffee, answered emails from distant acquaintances, but her mind kept circling back to the same question. Who was she, if not Julian Vaughn's wife? Who was she, if not the face of a foundation, the hostess of a world that no longer wanted her? Late that afternoon, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name she hadn't seen in months. Simone Brooks, an old friend from her NYU days, someone who had always admired Evelyn's ambition and drive. Hesitating, Evelyn answered. Evie? Simone's voice was gentle, concerned. I saw what happened at the gala. I'm so sorry. I just wanted you to know. I never believed their version of the story. You made that foundation what it is. Everyone who matters knows that. Evelyn swallowed, her voice trembling. Thanks, Simone. It just feels like I lost everything. Like I don't matter anymore. Listen to me, Simone said, her tone suddenly fierce. You are more than Julian, more than any headline or gala or socialite. You built something out of nothing. You changed people's lives. Don't let them take that away from you. Something in Simone's words struck a chord. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Small, but stubborn. Maybe she wasn't powerless. Maybe, even now, she could reclaim something of herself. She didn't know what that looked like yet, but she knew she owed it to herself to try. That night, as the city pulsed outside, Evelyn sat by the window, watching the lights flicker on in the skyscrapers across the river. She wrapped herself in a blanket, feeling the first stirrings of resolve in her chest. If her story was really over, why was she still here? Why was her heart still beating, still aching for more? She realized then that maybe she hadn't lost everything. Maybe she had simply been given a blank page, a chance to write something new. For the first time since the betrayal, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that her best chapters might still be ahead. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the pain and the possibility swirl together. Tomorrow, she told herself, would be different. Tomorrow, she would begin again. The days following her breakdown were the quietest of Evelyn's life. The pain still lingered, raw and unyielding, but beneath it, something new was growing. It started as a simple decision to open the old safe at the back of her closet. The safe was dusty, the numbers on the dial barely visible, but her fingers remembered the combination by heart. Inside were the remnants of a life she'd hidden from the world. Legal documents, bank statements, and an old blue velvet box. Evelyn sat on the floor and opened each folder, forcing herself to face what she'd neglected for too long. She'd always told herself it was just rainy day money, a phrase Julian had teased her about, calling it cute. But Julian never knew the truth. Before she married him, before she became Evelyn Vaughn, she was Evelyn Harper, the only grandchild of industrialist Samuel Harper, a man whose quiet empire stretched from tech startups in Silicon Valley to shipping conglomerates in Singapore. Her grandfather had been a genius, but he hated the spotlight, and when he died, he left his fortune to Evelyn in a complex trust, managed by lawyers who answered only to her. Evelyn had always been afraid of the money. She thought using it would make her a target, that it would change how people saw her. So she hid it, choosing to build a life based on love and hard work instead. But now, staring at the papers, she realized she had been running from her own strength. And for what? To please a man who never really loved her, to survive in a world that would always choose a shinier story over the truth. A surge of energy flooded through her veins. All this time she'd been living as if she had nothing. In reality, she had everything she needed to rewrite the ending. As the days passed, Evelyn made calls, first to her grandfather's old lawyer, then to a tech investor she'd met at a conference years ago, then to a venture capitalist who owed her a favor. Each conversation was careful, strategic, but confident. No one questioned her authority. Most sounded relieved to hear from her, as if they'd been waiting for the day she'd reclaim her name. With every call, Evelyn felt her old self return. The ambitious college graduate who once believed she could change the world, the strategist who never flinched from a challenge. She reached out to the directors of the charities she'd worked with for years, offering silent funding and new connections. She didn't need headlines or credit. She needed to know that her work, her values, would live on, with or without the Vaughn name attached. But her greatest move was yet to come. One rainy morning, a sleek black sedan arrived at her building. Alexander Pierce stepped out, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his silver hair glinting in the mist. Evelyn hadn't seen him since their flight out of New York. She'd assumed he'd moved on, but now, as he climbed the stairs and knocked on her door, she realized how wrong she'd been. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice gentle. Evelyn nodded, stepping aside. He took in the boxes, the files, the blue velvet box. "You're working," he observed, a hint of a smile on his lips. "I can see the Harper in you now." Evelyn almost laughed. "I guess I always thought I had to choose. I could be strong, or I could be loved. Never both." Alexander shook his head. "That's what men like Julian want women to believe. They're afraid of what we become when we stop asking for permission." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way his presence filled the room, but not in the way Julian's ever had. Alexander didn't want to control her. He wanted to see her succeed, to be her ally, not her master. "Why did you come?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because I heard about the gala. Because I know what it feels like to be erased, and because I have an offer." He handed her an envelope. Inside were the details of a new business venture, a global charity initiative that would fund women-owned startups and provide scholarships for underprivileged girls around the world. The project needed a leader, someone with vision, connections, and a track record of building real change. "I want you to run it," Alexander said. "Full autonomy, full backing, your name on every contract." Evelyn stared at the papers, disbelief warring with hope. "Why me?" He met her gaze. "Because you built an empire with nothing but grit and kindness. Because you survived what would have destroyed most people. Because you have more power than you realize. And because the world is ready for women like you to lead." For the first time in months, Evelyn smiled, a real, honest smile that made her feel like herself again. She felt the heavy shell around her heart begin to crack. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady. Alexander grinned. "You'll need a team, and I have just the people in mind." For the next several days, Evelyn assembled her army. She recruited Simone, her old friend, and a handful of former colleagues and allies she'd helped over the years. Each woman brought her own strength, her own scars. They understood what it was like to be underestimated, overlooked, erased. The work was intense but exhilarating. With each day, Evelyn felt her confidence return. She stopped reading the tabloids, stopped caring about Julian and Brielle's latest antics. Instead, she poured her heart into something bigger, something that would outlast any scandal or betrayal. But beneath the triumph, a question lingered. What would Julian do when he realized the woman he'd cast aside was no longer just surviving, but thriving? What would happen when the city saw who Evelyn really was? The answer was coming. And this time, it would be Evelyn who owned the stage. Evelyn stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hands pressed against the cool marble, studying her reflection as if seeing herself for the first time. The shadows of sleepless nights had faded, replaced by a new light in her eyes. Clear, confident, unafraid. Gone was the woman who shrank in the corners of ballrooms, who bit her tongue for peace, who allowed herself to be diminished in the name of love. What she saw now was the version of herself her grandfather always believed in. A woman made for more than surviving other people's ambitions. The transformation was more than skin deep, but it began, in small part, with the surface. On the advice of Simone and the other women on her new team, Evelyn decided to change everything that could be changed. Her hair, once a gentle chestnut, was now a rich, assertive dark brown, cut into a modern, effortless bob. She updated her wardrobe, trading the demure dresses Julian preferred for sleek, powerful silhouettes. Tailored blazers, bold colors, sharp heels that clicked with every step she took. Each detail was a declaration. She was done apologizing for taking up space. But the real metamorphosis happened in the choices she made and the risks she was now willing to take. Each morning began with strategic calls to her new board, mapping out their ambitious agenda. She wasn't content with being a silent partner or a donor behind the scenes. She took center stage, negotiating partnerships, organizing high-profile events, and leveraging Alexander Pierce's connections in Europe and Asia. She spoke on panels about women's leadership, signed her name to initiatives supporting education and entrepreneurship, and graced magazine covers, not as Julian Vaughn's ex-wife, but as Evelyn Harper, founder and CEO. For the first time, Evelyn felt the power of her own voice. It wasn't about being the loudest in the room, it was about being heard for the right reasons. She insisted on integrity and transparency in every deal. She prioritized hiring other women who had been underestimated, who'd clawed their way through glass ceilings and glass walls. In staff meetings, her ideas were met not with skepticism or polite nods, but with genuine enthusiasm and respect. Of course, the world took notice. The first article came out in a major business magazine. The rebirth of Evelyn Harper, from socialite to CEO. The headline sent a ripple through Manhattan, but it was the story inside that caught fire. Reporters marveled at how quickly she'd pivoted from heartbreak to headlines, how she'd taken her pain and spun it into a global movement. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Some doubted her, others cheered her on. And a growing legion of Team Evelyn supporters began to drown out the critics. Evelyn didn't care about the noise. She knew there would always be doubters. But for every whisper of gossip, there was a letter from a girl in Iowa or a woman in Mumbai, thanking her for showing that resilience wasn't just for fairy tales, that sometimes the princess saves herself. With her confidence blooming, Evelyn started to re-enter the social world she'd once avoided. Invitations poured in from organizations eager to claim her as a keynote speaker, a guest of honor, a living testament to the power of reinvention. She chose her appearances carefully, making her debut at the Women in Power Summit, a global event hosted in London, attended by world leaders and titans of industry. On the night of the summit, Evelyn stood backstage, nerves buzzing beneath her skin, but her resolve never wavering. She wore a cobalt blue suit, fitted, elegant, with just enough edge to signal she was nobody's shadow. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose in a spontaneous ovation, camera flashes illuminating her like starlight. She began her speech not with a recitation of credentials or a recounting of past pain, but with a challenge to the room. For too long, we've been told our value lies in how quietly we suffer, how gracefully we disappear when we're no longer wanted. I say our value is in how loudly we rise, in how fiercely we refuse to be erased. Her words reverberated through the hall, the applause thundering in her ears. For a moment, Evelyn thought of Julian and Brielle, imagined them sitting somewhere in their perfect penthouse, watching her on a glowing screen. She hoped, for their sake, that they finally understood what she had always known deep down. Power isn't given, it's claimed. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's star rose higher. Magazine covers, news segments, awards, her name was everywhere. Former friends who'd ghosted her now sent messages, hoping to reconnect. She was gracious but firm, never forgetting who stood by her in her darkest hours. Her parents, overwhelmed with pride, visited her new office, her mother bursting into tears, her father grinning from ear to ear. But Evelyn never let success distract her from her mission. She made sure her foundation's first scholarship went to a girl from her hometown in Iowa, a girl whose only dream was to see the world. She reached out personally to every woman who applied for mentorship. She listened, she remembered, she led. Still, the past was not quite finished with her. Rumors began to swirl that Julian and Brielle were in trouble, financially, emotionally, and publicly. Board members whispered of unrest, donors reconsidered their loyalty, and more than one headline hinted that the Vaughn Foundation's new era was already unraveling. Evelyn watched from a distance, calm and focused. Her time for revenge would come, but not tonight. Tonight, she celebrated not the fall of her enemies, but the rise of herself. She was no longer just someone's wife or someone's ex. She was the architect of her own future. A woman who had been underestimated, but never ever again ignored. It was the social event of the year, another Vaughn Foundation gala, but this one different from all the rest. The city buzzed with rumors. Would the new power couple, Julian and Brielle, manage to pull off a successful night after months of quiet scandals? Would their once loyal donors return, or had the tide finally turned? Evelyn watched it all unfold from the comfort of her penthouse overlooking Central Park, her phone chiming with updates from Simone. She didn't plan to attend, not at first. She'd moved beyond that world, she told herself, and yet, as the night wore on and messages poured in, she felt the pull of unfinished business. Simone's texts were insistent. You won't believe the chaos. Brielle looks panicked. Press is everywhere. People keep asking where you are. Evelyn smiled, remembering the years she'd stood quietly on the sidelines, supporting a man who'd never truly seen her. Tonight, she wasn't going to hide. She made a call, and within an hour, a town car was waiting outside her building. She arrived late, deliberately so. By the time she entered the Marquise Hotel, the ballroom was humming with unease. Donors clustered in wary groups, their eyes flicking between Julian and Brielle, who were doing their best to project confidence. A few guests recognized Evelyn instantly, their expressions shifting from surprise to respect. The press, sensing a story, pivoted their cameras as she crossed the threshold, every step calm, measured, powerful. Julian saw her before anyone else did. For a moment, his practiced smile faltered, replaced by a look of something like fear. Brielle's face went white, her hand tightening around her champagne flute. The orchestra trailed off awkwardly mid-song as the energy in the room shifted, a ripple that turned into a wave. Evelyn didn't shrink or stall. She walked directly to the table of VIP donors, many of whom she'd cultivated over years of hard work and real friendship. They rose to greet her, some embracing her warmly, others simply shaking her hand with obvious relief. "It's so good to see you," said Mrs. Alvarez, one of the city's most influential philanthropists. "We've missed you terribly. The foundation hasn't been the same." Evelyn thanked her, accepting the kindness with quiet grace. As she moved through the room, more and more guests broke from their conversations to approach her, some offering congratulations on her recent successes, others apologizing for how things had ended before. By the time she reached the front of the ballroom, it was clear to everyone who the real center of gravity was. The main event of the evening was a panel on women's leadership and philanthropy. Evelyn had been listed in the program as an honored guest, a last-minute addition after several sponsors threatened to pull out if she wasn't involved. Brielle, determined to maintain control, insisted on moderating the discussion herself, hoping to outshine Evelyn once and for all. But when the panel began, it was clear that Brielle was out of her depth. Her questions were shallow, her comments rehearsed, and the audience, used to Evelyn's intelligence and authenticity, grew restless. When Evelyn finally took the microphone, the room fell silent. She began not by attacking her rivals, but by lifting up the women around her. Tonight, I want to talk about the invisible work women do. The work that goes unseen, unpraised, and often unrewarded. I want to talk about how true leadership isn't about who gets the credit, but about who changes lives. The applause was thunderous. Evelyn spoke with clarity and conviction, sharing her new foundation's vision, her commitment to empowering other women, and her refusal to be erased by anyone's narrative. She shared personal stories, some painful, some triumphant, but never once stooped to bitterness. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. Julian, watching from the edge of the stage, felt the cold sting of defeat. Everything he'd built on spectacle and status was slipping through his fingers, replaced by something he could neither command nor control: respect. Even Betrayal, ever the performer, couldn't hide her jealousy or her terror as she watched the crowd embrace the woman she'd tried so hard to replace. But the coup de grace was yet to come. After the panel, as guests mingled and the press jockeyed for interviews, Evelyn took her place beside Alexander Pierce, her business partner, mentor, and some whispered the real power behind her ascent. Together, they announced a groundbreaking partnership. Her new foundation would be absorbing the Vaughn Foundation's largest programs, backed by an unprecedented endowment from Pierce's global company. It was a move that had been weeks in the making, one that would leave Julian and Betrayal's charity little more than a shell. Reporters clamored for comment, cameras flashing as Evelyn, poised and unflappable, fielded every question with grace. She credited her team, acknowledged her mentors, and with a quiet smile, thanked all those who believed in me, even when it wasn't easy. The headlines that followed were electric. Evelyn Harper outshines Vaughn at his own gala. Pierce and Harper announce game-changing merger. From outcast to icon, Manhattan crowns a new queen. By midnight, it was clear. The city, the press, and even many of Julian's own former supporters had chosen sides. And this time, they stood with Evelyn. As she left the ballroom, her phone buzzed with a message from Simone. "You did it. You really did it." Evelyn looked back one last time, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Her victory was not in humiliating her enemies, but in refusing to let them dictate her story. She had built something lasting. She had earned her place, not by tearing anyone down, but by lifting others up. The world had seen her fall. Tonight, they watched her soar. The city glittered beneath the midnight sky as Evelyn's car glided along Fifth Avenue, a peaceful hush falling over the chaos she'd left behind. The events of the gala replayed in her mind, not as a blur of revenge, but as a clear, unbroken line leading her to this moment. For the first time in years, she felt utterly, perfectly calm. She leaned back against the cool leather, phone silent for once, and let the adrenaline fade. Her team was celebrating at her new foundation's office, the women who'd stood beside her to the end. Simone's laughter would be echoing through the halls, and her parents, watching the news from Iowa, would surely be crying happy tears. The world had finally seen what Evelyn could do, not as someone's wife or someone's ex, but as the main character in her own story. Across the city, Julian and Betrayal faced a very different night. Their public unraveling was the talk of every morning show, every tabloid. Donors were pulling out, lawyers were circling, and the phone calls had gone from congratulatory to confrontational. Betrayal sat alone in their penthouse, her ring feeling heavier than ever, as Julian raged about loyalty and betrayal. But the truth was plain for both. The world they built on shallow victories and erasing others was already crumbling. No amount of money could buy back what they'd lost. Evelyn watched the headlines scroll by on her phone, stories not of scandal, but of hope. Young women from around the world tweeted their thanks and their dreams. The hashtag No Regrets trended as thousands shared their own stories of starting over, of reclaiming what they'd been told was lost. In the days and weeks that followed, Evelyn's life became busier than ever. She spoke at universities, mentored young leaders, and traveled to cities where women's voices were still silenced. She appeared on magazine covers, yes, but more importantly, she appeared in boardrooms, classrooms, and shelters, reminding everyone that power and kindness are not opposites. At the heart of her new work was a simple promise: never let anyone write your story for you. Her foundation's motto became its rallying cry: begin again, unapologetically. The world had seen Evelyn rise from the ashes, not by stepping on others, but by lifting as she climbed. One rainy afternoon, as she prepared for an international flight, Simone joined her in the office. "Did you ever imagine," Simone asked, "that all of this could come from what happened last year?" Evelyn smiled. "I never imagined any of this. I just knew I couldn't go back. I had to become someone even I could respect." Simone nodded. "You know, you're giving a lot of women permission to demand more." Evelyn's gaze was steady. "That's all I ever wanted. I wasted so many years making myself small to fit into someone else's vision. Now I want every woman to know, you're not here to decorate someone's life. You're here to build your own." As she boarded her jet that evening, Alexander Pierce already on board, reviewing new plans for their next project, Evelyn paused at the threshold. She looked out over the city, remembering the lonely nights, the betrayals, the despair, and she whispered a silent thank you to the woman she once was, the woman who refused to disappear. The world would never know all the small battles she fought alone, or the tears she shed when the cameras were gone. But that was the secret strength of women everywhere. They are forged in private, revealed in public. Before takeoff, Evelyn took a moment to write a letter, one she would publish on her foundation's website. A letter to every woman who'd ever been told she was too much, too little, too late. You are not invisible. You are not finished. Every ending is a door. Do not wait for someone to open it for you. Kick it down. When they call you difficult, say thank you. When they underestimate you, let them. The world is full of people who will take credit for your work, erase your name, and tell you to be grateful for the crumbs you're given. Leave them behind. Build your table. Invite everyone who knows what it means to start over. Love is not a prize for shrinking yourself. It's what you give yourself when you finally take up space. You owe it to every girl who comes after you, and to yourself. As the jet soared into the clouds, Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed in the future. No more regrets. No more apologies. She was proof that heartbreak does not have to break you, and that sometimes the greatest love story is the one you write for yourself. In the end, her story wasn't about an ex-husband, a lost title, or even revenge. It was about rebirth. It was about choosing yourself again and again, even when the world tells you not to. And for anyone tempted to underestimate her, or any woman, let Evelyn's warning ring clear. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes the quietest women are the ones who change the world. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here until now? If you are, I know something about Evelyn's journey has touched your heart in some way. Because honestly, this isn't just a story about a glamorous life, betrayal, or even revenge. It's about the power of choosing yourself, even when the world tries to write you out of your own life. Sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed is exactly what sets you free. As the great Lao Tzu once said, new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings. That's the truth Evelyn discovered. Heartbreak doesn't have to break you. It can heal you if you let it. So if you're standing at a crossroads, doubting your strength, remember, you're not alone. Every ending can be a new start. If you found even a piece of yourself in Evelyn's courage, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And tell us in the comments, what part of this story resonated with you the most? Your story matters. Maybe today is the day you begin again, unapologetically.